Hi everyone, so this is the video where I'm going to be explaining what you need to do for major project number one. So you've got this actual document here, this assignment in Blackboard. Hopefully you've already read it. But here's the video that kind of explains it. If you haven't already read it, make sure that after you watch the video, you go back and look at it carefully. So what I say here for major project number one, you are to write about the metaphorical language in any one of the following poems, right? So you've got one poem, one of the following poems: Persimmons, Dothead, of the threads that connect the stars, or What It's Like to Be a Black Girl. So again, you choose one of those poems. You cannot do a comparison. You cannot talk about two. You are only going to talk about one of the following poems. I'll let you take a quiz here. All right, so I say in here that your project should begin with a clear thesis. That is, at the beginning of the project, you must clearly state what you want to prove, right? So there has to be something that you prove in there. We'll talk about what that is. So let's look at the example that I give you. Using the Latin deli as an example. Of course, you cannot write about the Latin deli because of what I said up here, right? You have to choose one of these four poems. You cannot write about the Latin deli. I'm just using this as an example so that I'm not providing you with a thesis for your actual project. So to be clear, you definitely cannot write about the Latin deli. I'll let you even take a quiz here. So a possible thesis for the Latin deli, again, this is just an example of what something might look like. You cannot write about the Latin deli. A possible thesis would be, in the Latin deli, Judith Ortiz Cofer uses metaphorical language to show us how even though immigrants willingly come to the United States, they can still feel a deep longing for the places that they have left. Okay, so notice that I say the second bolded part of this sentence is vital to your thesis. You must discuss exactly what the metaphorical language is telling us. So I say that you should say that you need to write about the metaphorical language in any one of the poems. But what you need to do here is you need to talk about what the metaphorical language is telling us. And so see how I say that specifically here in the bolded part. Even though they willingly come to the United States, they can still feel a deep longing for the places that they have left. So I'm not saying something like, in the poem, Judith Ortiz Cofer uses a lot of metaphorical language, right? I'm not just stopping there. I'm telling you specifically what that metaphorical language is doing. Okay, so you've got to have something like that. If you have a thesis that says, in the poem Dothead, the poet uses metaphorical language to tell us a number of things, that's not going to work, right? You cannot do that. You have to, in your thesis, tell us what it is those metaphors are going to be telling us. And so you're going to have to decide that. That's the kind of thing I'm going to want to see in your discussion board. I want you to begin to tell us what it is, what are those ideas that we are potentially seeing in the poem, and how the metaphors help us get to that. So this bolded part is really important. If you're not being specific in that bolded part, then you have not got a good thesis. Okay, so make sure to keep that in mind. I say you must be specific in that second part. So for the Latin deli, you could not say, in the Latin deli, Judith Ortiz Cofer uses metaphorical language to show us how immigrants feel, right? How they feel. How do they feel? You have to tell us, right? So see how this is not sufficient, right? This is a bad example. And so make sure you're not doing that. Don't just say, in general, in Dothead, the poet uses metaphorical language to show us how the character feels about his mother wearing a bindi. Well, no, that's not good enough. How does he feel? You have to fill that part in. Okay. In Persimmons, the poet uses persimmons as a metaphor to tell us how the poet feels. No. How does the poet feel? You have to be specific right there in your thesis. If you're not being that specific in the thesis, then the thesis is not going to be setting up the rest of the essay in the way in which it needs to be set up. So I say, notice that the first one, this one, tells us specifically about the conflicts many immigrants face about having left their homes. That's what you want for your thesis, this kind of specificity. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're going to be working on your own theses. So then the next I say down here, you must use specific quotes from the text to back up your ideas. That is, you need to show us exactly what the metaphors say. So let me give an example. So instead of saying something like Kofor shows us that the old man is homesick, that we may say that that's true, but how is it that you know that? What you want to say is what we say here. When Kofor writes about the hunger of the fragile old man, she is using hunger as a metaphor to show us how deeply the old man misses his home. You see how what I do in that second one, I am using that term metaphor and I'm showing an example of the metaphor and show how that metaphor gets us to the bigger idea here, right? Because the idea is that hunger is something, hunger is biological. Hunger tells us that if you don't get something, you might die, right? You will eventually die. You can potentially die of hunger. So when we talk about the hunger of the old man and want to say how much he misses his home, he hungers for that home. Okay, which gives us a sense that he really feels like he needs that. It's not a matter of I'd like to go back home sometime. No, no, no. This is a deep desire. It's as deep as hunger. Hunger is being used as a metaphor to show us how much he misses that. And so that's how you're going to explain what the metaphors are doing. Make sure that you are getting to that kind of detail when you get into your body paragraphs, okay? So you got to use the specific quotes and show us very specifically how the quotes and say, look, here is a metaphor and here is what the metaphor is showing us. So make sure you're doing something like that. And I say you should also use any other relevant vocabulary to help you make your, sorry, I've got a typo here, to make your ideas as clear as possible. For example, you could say, when Kofor writes about the lists of items that the old man reads to her like poetry, the connotations, we know that word, we've been talking about it, the connotations of the word poetry suggest that the old man's grocery list is more beautiful and emotional than we usually think a grocery list should be, right? And so see how we've been talking about that word connotations. I wanted to make sure that you understood what that was, because you see how that becomes important in terms of this. You're supposed to come back and say specifically, what are the metaphors here and how are those metaphors helping us get to the larger idea? And you can potentially be using words like connotations. The connotations of the words help us understand that. Okay. I say that this project needs to be 3 pages long in an MLA format. Please note, any project with improper MLA formatting or a similarity score of greater than 35% on Turnitin will not be graded, right? So 2 things. I want perfect MLA formatting. For part 2, we're going to be talking about that. I've got some videos you're going to need to watch to make sure that you're doing your MLA formatting properly. And then I want to make sure that you don't have a similarity score of greater than 35%. I'll let you take a quiz on that quickly. And then just to be clear about what that means, a similarity score of 35%. Turnitin, looks at your paper and it says, are any of these words, this string of words that we have, are they coming from somewhere else? Can I find them anywhere else on the internet? Okay. Your quotes should be found, right? If you've got a quote, they should be there, right? So you should not have a 0%. You should have some percentage of your sources, of your words coming from other sources, because you're going to be using quotes, and a lot of us are going to be using the same quotes. There are papers all over, people writing papers all over the country, and they have been writing about Persimmons or Dodhead or what it's like to be a black girl, and so those quotes are going to definitely show up in different places. Okay, so you should not have a 0. I do not want over 35%, because if you have over 35%, a couple of things are going on. One, either A, you've got too many quotes, right? If your project consists of more than 35% of quotes, that's too much quoting, because basically what you're doing is just saying, look, here's the poem, and you aren't doing as much commenting on the poem. So I wanted to have less than 35% so that you have some quotes in there, but then to make sure that you specifically are going to be commenting on that. The other thing that might be happening is if you have over 35%, is if that similarity is not coming from the poems, but rather is coming from the fact that you've gotten your essay from somewhere else. You might be taking some paragraphs out of GradeSaver. or you might be pulling, getting an essay that a student of mine from a previous semester has written, right? Turnitin is going to catch those things, so do not get involved with that. Right? You can potentially get a 0 for that. So I will not grade anything that's got a Turnitin score of greater than 35%. So when you turn something in, and I showed you when looking at Turnitin, where you can see where that Turnitin score is. If you have any questions about that, you can ask me. But look to see if that is greater than 35%. If it is, let me know and say, hey, I've got to upload something else again. So watch out for that. You don't want high similarity scores on Turnitin. Now I've got the rubric down here. And again, a rubric is just how I'm going to be marking this. Now, you are not going to get specific grades here. So let's what I said, either the rough draft or the final draft will be graded. I don't grade these. You get 100% for doing them. Instead, you will receive full credit for both assignments as long as they're 3 pages long or formatted properly and have a Turnitin similarity score of less than 35%. As long as you do those things, you're getting 100%. Right? This rubric, though, provides you a sense of what specifically you need to improve as you rewrite your rough draft to create a final draft. Okay, so when you turn in a rough draft, I'm going to mark this up. And I will give you scores on each of these things. The essay has has a clear thesis that addresses how metaphors help advance the meaning of the poem. The thesis is supported by quotes from the text. The essay shows an understanding of metaphorical language and other concepts discussed in class. The essay is well organized. We're going to delete that because they will have follow MLA format, otherwise I won't grade them. The essay is free of mechanical and grammatical errors. And then I will give you different scores on this. Now, remember when I asked you on the Turnitin comments quiz to say things like flavor, color, rhythm, and balance? That's what these are, and here's what the scores across are. And I wanted you to do that quiz with those nonsense categories: flavor, color, rhythm, and balance, because I want you to know how to check this thing, right? You need to be able to look when you do the rough draft to see where you are. If I'm giving you unsatisfactories down here in your rough draft, then you need to know that you need to improve, right? For your final draft, those are the categories that you need to improve in as you move into your final draft. And if I get a final draft where things have not improved, then I know that there's an issue because you didn't do much work, or at least you didn't do the kind of work that you were supposed to do. Okay, so that's what's going to be happening with this rubric score here that you'll see on your rough draft. So that's how this is going to work. For the first thing you need to do is post to the brainstorming discussion board, where I'm just asking you to talk about what you think you want to talk about. So we're building this up in stages. You don't have to just suddenly write this essay. You've got a brainstorming first. You'll have a writing plan, and I'll explain what that is later. But we're slowly going to be building this up. So you're going to post to the brainstorming discussion board, where you're going to talk about what you might talk about for these for these poems, right? What kind of thesis you might have. So post in that discussion board. I'll make some comments on that. Then you can go through and look at the videos about MLA formatting, and then we'll move on to the writing plan. As always, let me know if you have any questions.